Okay, so we're going to get started. Next up is going to be Dr. Maria Elena Bottazzi. Dr. Bottazzi is the Associate Dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine, as well as a Professor of Pediatrics at Baylor College of Medicine, Director of Research and Administration of the new Pediatric Tropical Medicine Division, and a leader in product development for the Sabine Vaccine Institute and Texas Children's Center for Vaccine Development. As she's involved intimately with so many medical partnerships, she'll be discussing this aspect of vaccine development in her talk, Combating Neglected Tropical Diseases, a Product Development Partnership Model to Accelerate Translation of Discoveries into New Vaccines.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for the organizers for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. So what I'm going to try to do, I think I have a little less than 30 minutes. I'm going to try to give you a big overview of who we are. We're very complex, as you can see, with all the titles and the names and the organizations that we are affiliated with. But hopefully at the end you'll get a little bit of clarity of what we do. And I'll also try to put it in perspective so that you can see also how it fits in within the National School of Tropical Medicine and what it is, our vision and our mission. So how many of you know who the bottom billion are? How many have you heard this term before? Read the book, that's great. So this is a term that actually came out of a big prominent economist that really tried to understand the link between poverty and, of course, the population. And as you know, we have approximately now around 7 billion people in the world, more or less. So out of those 7 billion, unfortunately, there's one of those billion that are populations that really live in very extreme poverty conditions. And by the World Bank, they refer to those who live either less than under $2 a day, sometimes they say $1 a day, sometimes here, as you can see, they refer to living under less than $1.25 a day. So we're talking that it's around 22% of the population of the world. And there's around 40% who actually live in less than $2 per day. That's a pretty big number, isn't it? 40%, can you imagine? It's sad, actually. So what are we doing about that? So we try to determine what this bottom billion of this population, what are they afflicted with? And unfortunately, it's actually even sadder that if you take that billion of the population in the world, pretty much almost all of them are afflicted by one, sometimes 2, 3, 6, maybe even more of these what's so-called the neglected tropical diseases. Why do you guys think they're called neglected? Someone, quickly? Well, they're hard to pronounce, sure. But why? What's the neglect? Sorry, I can hear. Well, I mean, the flashiness. So what does it mean to be for a disease to be flashy? But why would that disease have a lot of attention? Because it's affecting most likely people who have commercial economic power that would be able to buy medicines or really make a case of having interventions to resolve these types of diseases. So this is where I want you to see that link between the poverty, voice of people, the fact that they may not have the ability of really claiming that these diseases need to be addressed for their own health. But then what's the other key thing that you may not know? I mean, this other thing is that these diseases are considered chronic diseases. So what does it mean when you have a chronic disease compared to, let's say, an acute disease? You can have it, and you can have it for a long, long time, pretty much all your lifespan. So some of these diseases, you actually get infected when you're a little kid. But some of these, like hookworm, you can be 60, 70, 80 years old, and if you still live in an area where you actually have this, transmission contact, you can still have that disease. So it really lingers throughout your whole lifespan. The other distinction is being chronic, they don't kill. So not to say that the other diseases are less important, But, once you get it, you have the impact of death, it's done. I mean, sorry to say this, but these diseases, you get them, and you really never can get rid of them. And the sadness is that even though there may be interventions to cure them, if you continue living in this cycle of the fact that you continue getting reinfected, unfortunately the medicines don't prevent reinfection. They can cure you, but then you can get reinfected. So that's why ultimately, and it's true, they're very hard to pronounce, but they're fun diseases, actually. Very interesting parasites. Some of them are parasites, some of them are protozoa, some of them are intracellular parasites, some are bacteria. But you can see the enormity of populations that have these diseases. And if you consider, like I said, that most likely you don't get one, most likely you get 3 at the same time, so it makes it even worse. So the other thing which is also quite interesting, there's been a lot of perception that being called tropical diseases, that they're primarily located within the tropics, which is not necessarily 100% true. They may, now with globalization, diseases can really, it's not only due to globalization and immigration, but also due to changes in environment of the vectors and, transmission and all that. The other thing that is quite interesting is that, yes, it's impacting populations that are poor, but believe it or not, we just did an analysis with Dr. Hotes, and this is a paper that is coming out probably in the next week or two, I think he said it was in Foreign Affairs. I can't remember what journal, but I can certainly get it to you if you need. That we did an assessment that, yes, you could arguably find most of these diseases in countries or locations that are considered countries that are in development or poor countries, but believe it, now we found that most of them are found amongst the richest countries, in pockets of poor populations within the countries that are now considered not to be developing countries. So even within the BRIC countries, of course, Brazil, China, India, those are, of course, it's understandable. We already knew there were a lot of pockets, but now we even find them in the United States. I mean, who knew that we had poor people? Do you know? We actually have with all this whole downturn of the economic situation, it's probably gotten even worse, but that doesn't imply that the United States, with all in their 300 million people, there are a lot of people who are, living in these extreme poverties. You could argue that poverty in Africa is not the same as poverty in Latin America, so clearly, yes, you have different, ranges of poverty, but we do have that extreme living in less than a couple dollars a day populations that also live here. And here's some examples of some of the diseases that we actually can find, and we project that there's approximately 5 million Americans. Even sadder is that most of these are actually in Texas, because Texas is an enormous state. You add the fact that it's also a southern state, it's a border state, with Mexico and Central America. But of course, if you look at the whole span of the United States, it's true. There's pockets in the southern regions, like the southern states, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Texas. Certain pockets you can find them up in the area of the American Indian populations. So there are, and if you're interested, look up. There's a paper that also we wrote with Peter that actually describes, the neglected infections of poverty within the United States. So we have a situation now. We don't only now consider ourselves working on diseases that you have to go to Africa or you have to go to Brazil or Honduras. You actually have people who are affected by these diseases here in the Bentop General Hospital, because unfortunately they live here in Texas. So in response to that, I think we really, took the opportunity of coming to Baylor College of Medicine. We've been here a year and a half, with the opportunity that the college gave us to actually establish a 4th school within the college, which is the so-called the National School of Tropical Medicine. And we're trying to then, really leverage all the powerhouse, intellectual powerhouse that we already have within the Texas Medical Center with all the institutions, UT, the hospitals, and of course the expertise within BCM, to really try to focus on how can we study and raise the awareness of these diseases. And of course, our major mission as a traditional school mission or academic mission is to address education, have a strong research and development program, but we actually added also a couple of other things, a clinical component, because we actually now have also the ability of providing clinical care within even state of Texas and Houston particularly, but also have an arm of policy and advocacy. So I'll try to explain to you a little bit of what we do with all of them, and then I'll focus a lot on the R&D, which is what I wanted to also share with you, that how do you therefore develop new products for diseases that most likely no one will ever buy, right? That's the issue. How do you develop new drugs, new vaccines, when you know that big pharmaceutical companies can't really, afford, or they don't have the ability of convincing their stakeholders to say, let's invest $100 million and we're going to collect back nothing. A lot of public health, but not a lot of money. So I'm going to try to go over some of that. This is just for you to see how we think through the process of establishing, a school strategy. Of course, we have a vision, which I just explained, that is to try to bring together all the knowledge of the Texas Medical Center and focus it on trying to really accelerate and advance R&D in the area of, products for these diseases. We're starting to implement new programs to also train health professionals, physicians in training, nurses, PhD students, etc. We have done a couple of things in the clinical aspect because of the fact that we have now the opportunity not only to do care here in Houston and what we're doing for policy. We've set up a couple of some priorities to do this, and of course in each of these different categories. So I'll go over some of these things, especially what we call now the Sabin Texas Children's Hospital Center for Vaccine Development, which when we got recruited down to Baylor College of Medicine, we already had around, Peter Holt has had probably 30 years expertise in, tropical diseases, but we used to be at the George Washington University where we set up a vaccine development program. We were there for 11, 12 years, and we actually recruited and we brought down the whole team, and, I'll show you how we're expanding on that. And then these are some of the offerings that we're already started to develop in the area of education. We have a table outside which you can get some information on the diploma in tropical medicine. We're also moving forward with an intro course specifically targeting undergraduate students from the different universities within Texas. And we're currently starting to develop a vaccine biotechnology program to really leverage what we do in the labs for vaccine. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. We have now 2 clinics, that we've revamped within Baylor College of Medicine, and some of the advocacy things that we're doing for these diseases. So to start very briefly, again, in the area of education, we really realized with this concept that only if you really are a physician who end up living in areas where you have this perception that you have this tropical medicine, in the US, you don't really get that much of training anymore. And you don't expect as a physician when you see your patients that you're gonna find someone that has leishmaniasis. And now it's becoming more and more often. So we think that we really need to start increasing the way that physicians, as they get trained, and physician professionals already in the workforce, that they really need to get reacquainted with the fact that now you can actually find it here and you can have these patients. So we set up a diploma in tropical medicine, which is an intensive 8-week course where you can do it in modules of 2 weeks each, that really can give you a very big overview of what are all these diseases, where they are, and as a physician really get again reacquainted with how do you even diagnose them and treat them. We even have a hands-on laboratory. Right now it's open for students, medical students, and physicians, professionals, but also we have the ability of accepting some in nursing school or PAs. It has to be someone who really has the clinical background or the ability of, and we're developing now ways to, and that's why we're starting with this introduction in tropical medicine, how we can then create other types of intensive workshop courses for undergraduates, for PhD students, for people just in the biomedical field. In addition, in collaboration with RISE, we initiated since last year a seminar in tropical medicine. This is bringing in experts in different topics in the area of tropical diseases. We had one session that was to overview all the global health aspects of tropical medicine. The current one that I think is starting next month or something, I can't remember when the seminar is starting, but it's going to be a seminar in tropical medicine that relates to One Health. So it really is going to bridge everything from even veterinarian field, vector biology, and human health. So this is, and we're now, of course, continue developing the area of vaccine biotechnology. For the clinics, as I mentioned, we were really surprised of the amount of patients that you actually get are referred, and they're usually referred to the infectious disease clinics that actually are really specifically tropical diseases. So within the Department of Medicine, Infectious Disease at Baylor College of Medicine, we partner with them, and together with now the Smith Clinic of the Bentop Hospital, we have a clinic that specifically are to provide care to patients that are referred that have tropical diseases. And we've been open since October, and it's actually, amazingly going pretty well. We have a half-day clinic every Friday, and we've seen patients from, leishmaniasis, Chagas disease, and they're all patients that are actually, local. So there's not this issue of that they're coming, with it. We're also doing some epidemiological studies to evaluate, distribution and prevalence of these diseases. There's a fabulous study which is still unpublished where we reevaluated homeless samples that were collected for the purpose of evaluating West Nile virus transmission within Houston. We reassessed those same sera, and we found, believe it or not, up to 14% of prevalence of these homeless populations to have infected by Chagas disease, which is unheard of. Normally, you find 1 to 2% usually in the U.S. So clearly it is a transmission issue. There are bugs here in Texas. There are bugs that are infected, and therefore, if you happen to live in precarious conditions, even certainly the homeless under the bridges, and they're all down here. They're not very far. So we are really now looking to see how we can engage the CDC and come up with strategies so that we can actually establish some control programs for that. In addition, we, of course, with Baylor Clinic, we have a traveler clinic. So this, tailors to students or anyone who wants to travel and wants to get their vaccinations up to date. So the next thing is this whole concept of, so what do? We have to really come up with new strategies of how to develop new tools to really control these diseases. And so recently, Peter, as part of the Institute of Medicine, he was chartered to actually review what would be the best way to really, advocate and make the awareness within these G20 countries so that there could be some redirection of and strengthening of how would you do R&D, especially in the area of infections of poverty. So there's a lot of talk, and the key is that you have to really start working directly with the governments. You have to really engage them so that they're aware, and there's a lot of advocacy. There's also certainly a lot of U.S. global health development that is not siloed, like, not only have a HIV program or only a malaria program or only a TB program, to make them more integrated and certainly piggyback onto, these already, big established programs like the Global Fund, et cetera. And certainly also reform a little bit of other types of activities so that it would have better incentives for academics and even pharma to be able to develop new products. So that said, we are really interested in the development of these parallel generation of new tools. Of course, we know that there are drugs available, which they're okay, they're definitely cheap, but they're really not totally doing what they should be doing. Even if you do mass deworming programs or administration, we still haven't been able to target those targets that the WHO have of, for instance, for the helminths is you have to target 75% of all the school-age children. I think we're barely at 10-12%, so we can't really reach the populations. So for that, together with an institute, it's a nonprofit institution that I think it's around 15, 20 years old, that has always had in mind the ability of try to advocate for advancing novel tools for these types of diseases. We created what is now called the Sabin Vaccine Institute and Texas Children's Hospital. And that center of vaccine development, it's part of a cadre of organizations that are called the Product Development Partnerships. How many of you have heard about this concept before? Product Development Partnerships. So it's around now close to 10, 12, 13 years old. It was really spearheaded, by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation when they created a lot of their global health programs. Here is for you to show you a snapshot. By no means they're only for vaccines, but as you can see, you can create product development partnerships that work in areas of vaccine, microbiocides, therapeutic products, diagnostics, and then they span a series of different diseases. I'll focus on the ones for vaccine development, and there's some that actually are very well recognized that maybe you've heard before: the Malaria Vaccine Initiative, the International AIDS Vaccine Initiative. ARES is the PDP that develops vaccines against tuberculosis. And we therefore have had this recognition as a product development partnership. We've also been pretty fortunate that we've gotten some funds from the Bill and Melinda Gates to specifically advance the area of development of neglected tropical diseases. What makes the PDPs unique? So what makes them unique is that they work by partnership. So there's a big component of being able to work in groups and teams, but each of us have a very specific expertise, and we try to do this applying what we so-called a business model, like if you were a private entity, but applying those private entity business practices, but adapting them to the nonprofit sector, and try to therefore leverage even better the use of resources by advancing projects on milestone based performance indicators. So very different from a traditional NIH type of award mechanism, where we get paid only if you reach certain milestones. And for you to reach certain milestones, you continuously evaluate where the funds are going so that you can reach those milestones. So you create these partnerships knowing who has the expertise to do what, and therefore advance them. And we look for decision points, gating criteria to decide, yes, we achieve this, where do we go next? So it utilizes a lot of business practices, which is quite interesting, because now even the NIH started to opt for that model, and we see a lot of our submissions of grant proposal to NIH that require that you prepare these milestones-based type of programs, where you show them how you're going to do your product development plan, how you really are going to see how you make your decisions as you reach one stage to the other. It's not just the hypothesis scientific type of concept. You really have to say, I'm going to do this. If I get this result, I move this way. If I don't get this result, I have an alternative pathway. Our product development partnership is very based on recombinant protein-based technology. So again, all of us have a different expertise. Ares may be doing, other types of vaccine development platforms, but our product development partnership uses recombinant protein vaccines, so that technology really drives also what kind of products you can develop. We're actually the only academic health-based PDP. So PDPs can range from a spectrum. You can be totally virtual, like for instance the pathways for appropriate technologies in health that have a bunch of these PDPs. They're totally virtual. They sub-award and subcontract and define partners totally independent of their own organization. Ares, for instance, TB, they're all in-house. They have even their own manufacturing facilities. They have their own clinical sites. Everything is done in-house. We're kind of halfway. We do a lot of things in-house, but then we sub-award or contract out things that for us are quite, onerous, like manufacturing, doing toxicology, and certain very high regulatory burden aspects. And again, we use efficient integration of partners. We apply a lot of business-like practices. We do a lot of portfolio management with risk mitigation plans and all that. It's crazy. And it's a merit-based management, so we really have to go through a critical path. It's not just, it's fun to do this experiment. It has to really show what it will lead. And the model that we do it, because our diseases are certainly very hard to garner all the funding, because they're for diseases that are for poor people. We have established a system where we partner a lot with academics, and we train them to think in this business-like practices type of methodologies. It's not easy because we scientists tend to go further very very scientific. We partner with what we call these innovative developing countries: Brazil, Mexico, China, India. And of course, for manufacturing, we try to provide that technology so that it's actually manufactured within the country that will need the vaccine. So we don't pretend to manufacture eventually vaccines here and then export them. We would like them to be done there. And this is what we do in our labs here. We actually do like I said, we do some things in-house. We do all the discovery, all the cloning in these platforms, and then we do, of course, all the process development, scale-up, formulation, etc. And this is just to show you very briefly how we go through the thought process. Ultimately, the key is to very rapidly enter into clinical trials, which is what makes it really important, to really advance into clinical trials. But before you actually arrive to get into clinical trials, there's a lot of work that you have to do. So in our labs, if we go back to this, in our labs, each step have a lot of thought process. And here is just to show you some of the things that we do. We have to certainly evaluate the research data, the target candidates, rank them, because for you to develop a vaccine, you have to know which target you need to select from the organism that you want to attract. You have to understand the immunological responses or the host-pathogen relationships. And then when you enter into this whole concept of making the vaccine, you really have to decide how you're going to do it in the laboratory that also would pass all the regulatory requirements. And we therefore follow, again, a lot of these business-like practices where we create these documents with a strategy. We then have target product profiles, which really tells us already where we want to be. How many of you know what a TPP is? Have you ever seen one? I can assure you you have. When you go to the pharmacy and buy a medicine, at least not maybe here in the US that they already give you a little, but don't it usually comes with a little insert, a sheet that says indications, who can take it? That is a target product profile. So we have to create one even before that product exists, and already know how it would look like, and then go backwards and design a strategy of how would you get to come up with that product. So if I want a vaccine that is for children, that is injectable, 2 doses, that is has this safety profile, I already have to come up with it and then say, how can then I make it that looks to that profile? And then the last piece, like I mentioned, is the fact that we also use the same approach in the policy arm, where we use the same translational public policy, where we provide all the scientific underpinnings, we share them with the policymakers, we published, and we therefore provide them, a means of understanding how these new products could eventually really lead into the communities. And this is some of the policy partners that we use, which are pretty traditional, of course, WHO and some others. And then ultimately, the currency that we have is publish, 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 present, advocate by, being there, people seeing what we're doing. And this is just to thank some of our funders and grant support, and this is our team that we currently moved down from DC. We've now actually expanded. We should have another picture. We're like 50 people now. We came down, we were like 15, but now we're like 50. So anybody who would like to come to the labs, welcome. We can show you how we actually come up with a little bottle of vaccine. Thank you so much.
Sorry. Thank you so much for probably one question. Yeah.
When you transfer the knowledge to in-country manufacturers, do you continue to hold the IP rights?
So we provide non-exclusive IP rights of something that gives you zero royalties. Meaning, yes, we give them away. Yeah, so one of the things that we do, and it is part of this whole policy component, is that we design what we call global access strategy plans, where we clearly already put, like if you get the technology and you make the vaccine, you cannot sell it. You have to work within your governmental, practices of going through like the revolving fund or through WHO. So most of these vaccines will go through the process of approvals through WHO pre-qualification and then work with WHO for them to be able to be distributed at low cost. One example, for example, is with the hookworm vaccine. We're working with the Brazilians, and that is the reason why we use these vaccine country manufacturers, and all of them are non-profit vaccine manufacturers. So they actually already have a mandate from the government to make vaccines for the Brazilians, and therefore they have to make them and provide them to the government, and then the government distributes them. The other piece also is that for them to be really cheap, we have to develop them with technologies that are cheap. So we target vaccines that are less than $1 a dose. So it also balances out.
So
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bottazzi, for your wonderful presentation.